Today I'm going to be reviewing, finally, OPETH's new album, The Last Will and Testament. I'm going to try to make this video as short but chock full of information as possible. I'm going to give you a specific chapter list, starting with my first impressions, which will then lead to a track-by-track discussion review of all 8 tracks. Then I'm going to figure out where this album will be placed in my OPETH album ranking. And then obviously my final thoughts. So, now that you guys know what you're in for, let's get started. For me, OPETH is a band that definitely exceeds expectations most of the time. Aside from me not liking their first 3 albums, they really haven't done anything terrible in their career. This album, for me, before I heard it, I didn't really have a feeling one way or another. I've kind of lost interest in OPETH, not because they're not good anymore, but I just kind of fell out of love with them on a personal level. It's just my connection to the band. I've only been an OPETH fan for about 15, 16 years. And I am a diehard fan of most of their catalog. You know, I like Ghost Reveries and Watershed just as much as I like Heritage and Pale Communion. Each album brings its own amazing content. But I wasn't really excited for this album quite as much as I'm excited for, say, the new Queensryche album or the new Dream Theater album. But I've decided to take my time listening to this, and I will reserve my final thoughts for the end, as that's going to be one of the chapters within this video. But I do want to say that I wasn't looking forward to this album coming out. I had no desire for new OPETH. I had no desire to even listen to it. When I heard Paragraph 1, I was immediately left feeling nothing. I didn't feel good. I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel anything toward this track. But I've been listening to it since it came out, which at this point is about 2 weeks. And I've come to a conclusion, and I want to go through. And what I'm going to actually do to make this as realistic a review as possible is I'm going to listen to all the tracks before I review them individually. So with all that said, let's jump into the album that I didn't want to get into in the first place, and let's see where this takes us. Thanks for watching, guys. Here we go. Welcome to the review of Paragraph 1, and I just want to go through this, give you my thoughts on it. The introduction is very atmospheric. You have footsteps, you have a door creaking, the bass part comes in, it's a very infectious, repetitive groove. That leads to the drum fill, and then the band comes in. It's just a classic way to open the album. It is a very decent album opener of a song. There's a good mix of clean and death vocals. You start to see the characterization of the vocals as Michael is kind of playing multiple parts here, as this is a concept album. And I never really got into the actual concept. I have not paid much attention to the lyrics. I'm not a huge lyric guy, especially with OPETH. It's more about the music for me. But there is a good mix of clean and death vocals. The guitar solo toward the end of the song is kind of, I mean, it fits the track, but it's kind of a whirlwind of a guitar solo. It's got a very dizzying effect, almost like a Meshuggah style guitar solo in a way. The highlight of this song, it comes in about 4.5 minutes in, and it's a string melody with both strings on its own, and then there's something else that comes in with it I'm drawing a blank on. But this melody really stands out to me on the song. It's a very grand melody, but it's also kind of got a very hopeless, despondent vibe to it as well. And of course, we love sadness when it comes to OPETH. right, on to paragraph 2. This song is very much a dance between the light and the dark, the heavy and the soft, right? We start out with a very soft intro. It erupts with a drum beat fill and some death growls, and then there is this part where it cuts down and it gets softer, a soft melody, which then returns back into a heavy part. There's a really cool Fender Rhodes style keyboard sound used in this one. Very jazzy solo in one aspect of the song. The very short guitar solo I find to be similar to paragraph 1. It's very dizzying. It's not very melodic. It's kind of crazy. Parts of this song that have a Jethro Tull vibe, and I don't know if that's because Michael likes Jethro Tull, or if maybe Ian Anderson had something to do with this, or maybe he just inspired it because he was on the album. For what it's worth, overall this song is kind of like this, you know, starts soft, gets heavy, goes soft, gets heavy, goes soft, gets heavy. The end is kind of a little bit droning for me. I feel like they could have cut it short a little bit. But my favorite part for this song comes in at about 1:20, and it comes right, it's the soft part that goes right into the heavy part, and then Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull does that narration. And behind his narration, you have the band playing that heavy rhythm. And then off in the background, you can hear Michael soaring these amazingly melodic vocal lines. Not necessarily words, but just notes. So that is my favorite part of the song. Overall, probably not one of my favorite tracks, but it is good. So I'm going to leave that part right here. Let's check it out. Paragraph 3 is, I think, the only track that doesn't have any death growls on it. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's clean vocals all the way through. It's got a very OPETH vibe. I'm hearing a lot of like Pale Communion and Heritage style melodies and vibes on this one. The Watershed style groove on the intro with the drummer just killing it. Very interesting part, but then like I said, it shifts and it becomes more of a OPETH vibe. The guitar solo was decent. You know, my favorite part of this one, it's not really that much of a part, but the vocal melody between like 2 minutes and 2 minutes and 15 seconds, it's just a very simple part, but that's the part that grabbed me. So overall, it's a decent tune. Not one of my favorites. Paragraph 4 is probably one of my favorite tracks. It starts off with a very simple but awesome bass line, and it's a good mix of clean and death vocals. The song really pops off at about 1:40 when the band kind of drops out. It almost sounds like it's the end of the song, and then the drums come back in. It's a slow fade in on the drums, and we're into a brand new groove, a brand new feel, brand new vibe, a new beginning right in the middle of the song. And Ian Anderson does a phenomenal progressive flute solo, which then slowly transitions to a guitar solo. And the guitar solo is just soaring and melodic and heartfelt and emotional, and it's great. And then about 3 minutes later, after this whole section is over, they return back to one of the themes that they use. They bring in the death growls again, and the rest of the song is kind of a little bit like I don't know, maybe it's too long in my opinion, but that section in the middle from 1 minute 40 on is just one of the best parts on the album. So I'm going to leave that part right here for you. On to paragraph 5. This one might be, in terms of the track itself as a whole, it might be my favorite track on the album. Paragraph 5 starts off with this very soft, almost Disney movie style string or flute. I'm not gonna pretend to know what instrument I'm hearing there, but it's very soft. It's just one instrument. It might even just be a keyboard patch. Very naturey sounding, very soft. You gotta hear it. And that breaks into full band stuff, more funky bass lines, a lot of melodic vocals on this one. In fact, there's a lot of Phrygian dominant vibes on this one. It gives it a very like exotic Arabian, Egyptian kind of mysterious vibe, specifically during the first guitar solo. So I really like the intro, and then you get the hand claps at 135. Which bring us into that Phrygian dominant breakdown with the guitar solo. And then there's another guitar solo, which is much more big and soaring at about 4 minutes and 20 seconds. And the Phrygian vibe kind of continues all the way through. This song, as a whole, forget that it's part of a concept album. As a whole, this is the best thing up to this point. So I love paragraph 5. On to paragraph 6, where OPETH brings in this very, I'm going to assume it's like an organ or a keyboard patch. It's a very like Metallica Orion style intro. Orion kind of fades in on this very specific like bass tone, and I get the same vibes off of this introduction. That part expands when the drums come in, and the drum beat that the guy uses is very original, very unique. It's very much something that I'm pretty sure I've heard on this album already, but it's a great drum beat. It's not your traditional metal drum beat. Then the part expands when the guitars come in, dropping these big wide open chords. You can feel everything kind of coming to a boil, and then the last phase is when they bring in the strings, which play the melody over the top. There's a lot more in the way of a mix of death growls and clean vocals in this one. And it like paragraph 2, it kind of weaves between the heavy and the soft almost all the way through. There is a really good solo breakdown section around 4:45 where there's an acoustic guitar vibe, kind of just doing an arpeggiation, and then the electric guitar playing this very warm, pseudo-jazzy style, but laid back type solo. And it just kind of recedes into the night. So overall, paragraph 6 is a really good track. A lot of good moments. Paragraph 7, which is the last track with the paragraph heading as the title, starts off, it's got more light and dark, soft and heavy. You know, it continues with that theme. There are a couple really nice keyboard solos in this one. Really cool sounding, borderline non-diatonic melodic pattern, specifically on keyboard. The moments of note would be around 2:15. There is a drum and bass groove that's going on while Ian Anderson narrates. And then there's an unusual piano part that's played, and then after that there's a keyboard solo that sounds like they're either playing outside of the key or maybe doing some diminished style work with that.
Effectively, these heirlooms are in essence worthless. Still, I consider them a token of my innermost sympathy. Pass them on to generations to come. The liberation of the wealthy, once perpetually shackled by greed. The wretched instead.
And then at 2:35, this is the absolute best part of the song, and one of the best parts on the album. There's a piano-bass combination where they're kind of, the piano is probably most likely doing two hands and the bass is following along like note for note, and it's got a very warm style feel to it, and that also contains Ian Anderson narrating over. There's something so interesting about having Ian Anderson's voice. You could have had anybody narrate this album, but that guy's got such a wonderful voice for narration as well as singing. And there's something so cool about the band playing in the background while he narrates on top of it. It's almost, it's like creepy, but in an awesome way. Here we are, the final track. This is the only track on the album that actually has a name other than a paragraph number. This one is called A Story Never Told, and this is the most cohesive song on the album. And what I mean by that is most of the songs on this album vary in color, texture, loudness, you know, how quiet, how heavy, how dark, how evil, how guttural. Are we doing melodic vocals? Are we doing, you know, crazy solos? Or are they more subdued? This song is literally, it's the most traditional in every possible way. It starts off with a very soft intro, which extends to a vocal melody that's played on the instruments, and then the actual vocals come in to support that melody. This song has a very heritage sound to it, in my opinion. As a listener, I get heritage vibes. It's all melody. I mean, this song has no death growls that I remember. It's just all, it's very chill. It's kind of like one feel all the way through. It's all very just supporting that melody. There's a key change at 305 that really catches the ear. I really love that. There's also this vocal part at about 349 where he's singing the melody and he kind of raises up. It's kind of the climax of the melody, and that leads to a solo section which basically carries out the last 2 minutes of the song or so. The solo at 505 is very emotional, very heartfelt. Love that fucking solo. And then the song just kind of slowly fades out, right? The solo just kind of continues, and it just fades to a close, and we're left with nothing else after that. So, stay tuned for my final thoughts and the album tier ranking update. Alright guys, a few weeks ago I released my official OPETH album ranking. It came out in 2 parts. I only did 9 actual albums in this ranking, and if you want to go back and learn why I only chose 9, I will leave the link to both parts in the description below. I want to fit this album in to the ranking. OPETH, The Last Will and Testament is way better than I expected it to be, and I'm not gonna hash this out in full here. I'm just going to give you the ranking, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. My ranking for number 1 was Watershed, number 2 was Ghost Reveries, number 3 was Blackwater Park, and number 4 was Damnation. Number 5 was Heritage. I am going to bump Heritage and everything that came before it on my ranking down a peg. So I am ranking The Last Will and Testament as the 5th favorite OPETH album of myself. So number 5, Last Will and Testament, 4, Damnation, 3, Blackwater Park, 2, Ghost Reveries, and 1, Watershed. This new album has made the top 5. That is pretty damn impressive. Stay tuned for my final thoughts. If you're still here, please leave me a comment saying you're still here. And please, for the love of God, hit the like button. I would really appreciate it. It makes this worth doing. Welcome to my final thoughts on the Last Will and Testament. Welcome to my final thoughts, guys. All right, if you've made it this far, You're a goddamn champion, and I appreciate you. I've put a lot of time and effort into listening to this and digesting it, and I'm putting this out later than most people because it takes me longer to absorb and digest things, especially works this complicated. OPETH has been around for damn near 30 years, if not more, and for a band to be putting out albums that are this good, this far into their career, it's almost unheard of. I mean, think about all the bands. Metallica sucks these days. Megadeth is terrible these days. Even Dream Theater lets me down with their new material. But OPETH came in with a top 5 album ranking. These guys have made my top 5. This album has made my top 5 for OPETH albums. That is saying a lot, okay? This album is very thematic. It's very conceptual. The production on this album is not quite as good as maybe, say, Watershed and Ghost Reveries, but it's a close second. Everything sounds good. It sounds relatively well EQ'd. Everything has its place in the mix. You can hear the bass just as well as you can hear the keyboards, just as well as you can hear the vocals. There's no one thing that's stepping on something else's toes. It's just a perfectly fluid and content mix. This album is the bringing back of the death growls, and for the people that love the death growls on OPETH albums, I gotta say, the death growls themselves were kind of underwhelming. He was obviously serving the purpose of needing to because of the concept of this album, which I don't get into necessarily, he needed multiple voices, right? So he has his usual melodic new Peth voice, and then he brought back the guttural vocals of the old Peth way of doing things. But again, the guttural vocals themselves, they don't really grab me. They're nothing special. They're there. He still sounds good. He still got it, but they weren't really amazing. He didn't, set new ground with it or reinvent the wheel at all. He really just, he did what he does, and it sounds good for what it is. It serves the purpose, but I'm not into this album because of those growls, though I do appreciate that they're there because it adds more variance and depth to the sound. This is definitely OPETH's most delicately woven harmonic fabric, both in terms of the notes and the chords and the scales they use. The rhythms are exotic. There's odd time signatures. But most of the songs on this album, the thing that really blows me away is the constant up and down. They start with something soft and then they go heavy, and then they bring it back down again. But when they bring it back down, they're not just bringing it back down to the first phase of the song. They change it. There's like half a dozen to a dozen different vibes, different feels and styles and sections to each song, let alone the album itself. That is the most impressive thing, is that they've been able to be so creative, using so many different parts. Some of the best parts, unfortunately, were not reused on this album. There are several things that were reused, but my favorite parts were not reused. But that then again makes it just that much more special. So whether that's just a coincidence that I like those parts or whether they did it on purpose, who knows? But overall, this album exceeds expectations. Again, it's 5 out of 10 on my favorite albums, making it one of their best. And I don't know what else to say, so I'm going to end this video there. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed my favorite parts and my review and my take on the album. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.